Welcome back. Let's continue talking about our cost and benefit analysis for the tariff. And as we said in the previous video, our analysis relies upon the consumer and the producer surplus. Okay, so here let's quickly review their definitions. Consumer surplus is defined as the difference between the price actually paid by consumers and the maximum price they would be willing to pay. Okay. Now, what does this mean? The actual price paid by consumer, that's simply just the market price, right? That's the equilibrium price. So, for example, for a bottle of drink or beer, if the market price is just, $1 per bottle, okay? But that doesn't mean, all the consumers who decide to buy this bottle, the maximum price they're willing to pay is just $1, right? For example, we can do some experiments, and we actually see, in these some of the marketing campaigns of the big companies, they grab, people on the street and trying to give them, a small cup of the drink or beer to taste. And then after that, they ask them, what's the maximum price you are willing to pay, right? For a bottle of that drink or beer. And you may hear, someone would say like, $1, someone would say, $2 or $5, right? Of course, someone would also say, probably would say like 50 cents or a quarter, right? But those guys who are willing to pay, the maximum price they're willing to pay, if it's below the $1 market price, then they would just decide not to buy, right? They will go with something else. Here, we narrowly focused upon the group of consumers who already decided to buy this product, right? Among them, some of them are actually, willing to pay a higher price, but they actually pay the market price, which is lower, right? So the difference here would be the consumer surplus, okay? And using the numbers I just, made up. So if someone is willing to pay $5 per bottle, but he or she actually pays only $1, then the consumer surplus in this case would be just $4. Okay. And of course, the higher the maximum price that you would be willing to pay, the larger the consumer surplus. Okay. And in the worksheet number 9, you'll find a simple numerical example. Okay, so we're going to do that in class together. Okay, producer surplus is defined as in a similar way. It's the difference between the price actually received by producers and the minimum price they would be willing to sell. Okay, so once again, if the market price for a bottle of drink is just $1, so that's going to be how much the producers will receive, right, per bottle. But it doesn't mean that's the lowest price they could go, right? If the price is lower for some reasons, then you still find, these drink producers are still selling, right? So the minimum price they would be willing to sell would be lower than the market price. Okay, so for example, for some producers, they might be willing to go as low as 50 cents per bottle, or even a quarter per bottle, right? So in that case, the producer surplus would be $1 market price minus 50 cents per bottle, or 25 cents per bottle, right? And the lower the minimum price they would be willing to sell, the larger the producer surplus. Okay, once again, in worksheet number 9, you would be able to find a simple numerical example. Okay, we're gonna you guys are supposed to do this and bring your worksheets to class. Okay. Now let's take a look at the graphical representation of the consumer and producer surplus. Okay, something once again you guys should already learned in intro and intermediate micro classes. Now here, what we show is just a typical demand and supply diagram. Okay, so downward sloping demand curve, upward sloping supply curve. Here you don't have to worry about trade or imports, exports, or tariff. It's just a regular supply and demand. Okay. And you find that equilibrium price is P1 and the equilibrium quantity is Q1. Okay. And we're going to say that, if, let's say, consumer A, okay, is willing to pay the highest possible price, okay, here. So let's imagine that you can put A right here at this point, okay, because he or she is willing to pay the highest price. And then B is willing to pay the second highest price. So when the price is, a little bit lower, then B will join A purchasing this product. So you can put B next to A, but a little bit lower on this demand curve, okay, because he or she is willing to pay the second highest price. Now C is willing to pay the third highest price. So you can put C right here next to B, but a little lower along the demand curve. Okay, so this way you can actually, line up all the consumers who are willing and able to buy this product above the market equilibrium price P1, right? Now, once you do that, you will realize, as we said, for consumer A's surplus, it will be, the difference between this price and P1. And for B, it will be this second highest price and P1. And for consumer C, it will be third highest price in P1, right? So if you do all consumers, you would be able to find that the consumer surplus on this figure would be equal to the area under the demand curve and above the equilibrium price. So that's the shaded area, the orange area here, that represents consumer surplus. Okay. Again, for each consumer, it's going to be the area below him or her, but putting all of them together, and especially, if we line them all up along the demand curve, then this orange triangle below the demand curve and above the equilibrium price would be the consumer surplus. Okay. On the supply side, we can do the same thing. Okay. So if the producer A is willing to sell at this, lowest price, then we will put him or her right here. Okay. And the producer surplus would be the area above him or her, but below P1, right? Because P1 is how much he or she actually receives. And then producer B would like to sell at the second, highest, the second lowest price, right? So we put B right here next to A, but a little bit higher along the demand curve. Again, his or her producer surplus would be the area above, okay, but still below P1, okay. And then you got C, D, E, all the consumers line up this way, and you would be able to find that the producer surplus is equal to the area above the supply curve and below the equilibrium price. So on this diagram, it's going to be the blue triangle here, okay? Now, once you understand these, then we can talk about the tariff, okay? And remember, we already said in the previous video that the tariff raises the domestic price in home, okay? And so this is what's going to happen, okay? Again, when the price used to be P1 without tariff, we find that the consumer surplus in home would be this big triangle from P1 all the way to the highest price, and then down to this point, right? This big triangle which equals A plus B, right? A is this small triangle up there, and B is this one right here, okay? Now, because the price is higher due to the tariff, so it goes up from P1 to P2, then we find that the consumer price decreases. Now it's equal to this smaller triangle A, right? So we actually find the consumer price loss, part B here, due to the rise in the price, right? And this is because, as we said, the price is higher and consumers buy less, okay? So we lose this much consumer surplus. On the production side, we find that here, when the price is P1, then the producer surplus would be just C here, this pink triangle here, right? And as we said, the area above the supply curve and below the equilibrium price, right? Now, because of the tariff, the price goes up from P1 to P2, and we find that the producer surplus gets larger, right? This makes sense because we said producers in home benefits from the tariff, right? So the new producer surplus would be C plus D. So the additional part is D here, okay? So the producer surplus gain due to a rise in the price, okay? All right, now once you understand these, we can put these two together.